Okay then. It looks like we are recording, and I already checked to make sure the camera and the computer and everything are all plugged in. So I think we're all right. Hello and welcome to question and answer number 186. And I have to admit I'm slacking a little bit because I didn't even bother to factor out 186. But we can be sure that it is not prime. And let's see here. It'd be 2 times 93. And then 3 would be 3 times 31. So it's 2 times 3 times 31. Not prime at all. This is my beverage. And we've got sort of a kind of low to medium amount of questions, which shouldn't take more than a few hours. Certainly less than a day. And so I guess we might as well just wade right into this. And the first question is from Romeo. And Romeo says, if life is suffering, why live at all? What is the point? I pose this question as an abstract inquiry, not as an endorsement of, gotta put the drink down, unaliving oneself. I had to put the drink down so I could do the air quotes. Albert Camus wrote an entire book on this subject called The Myth of Sisyphus. Why you shouldn't unalive yourself. And the best he could come up with, being an existentialist type, a French existentialist type, was just stay alive to spite the universe. Just it's staying alive, just stubbornly, perversely remaining alive is a good way to just thumb your nose at divine providence or whatever passes for sane. And I was very unimpressed by The Myth of Sisyphus. I think it might be that book in which Camus puts forth his interpretation of, Kafka's The Trial, I think. Or was it Moby Dick? He did some symbolic interpretation of some famous symbolic novel, probably either The Trial or Moby Dick. I don't remember which. And it seems like he just struck out. I mean, I'm just not impressed by Albert Camus' philosophy, even though he wrote some interesting fiction. I will give him that. So let's just dismiss The Myth of Sisyphus and the conclusion that Camus comes to at the end of that book. The thing is, according to Buddhism, like Buddhist philosophy, so long as you've got karmic momentum, which means so long as you're not fully enlightened yet, then even if you do unalive yourself, self-delete, self-terminate, as Arnold Schwarzenegger once said, then you're just going to get reborn again. In fact, you might get reborn with even worse karma because of all the mental agitation and negative mental states involved in self-deletion. I mean, if we consider the movie Groundhog Day, starring Bill Murray, as a kind of parable for rebirth. I don't know if the creators of that movie had that in mind deliberately, but you may recall, if you saw the movie, that Bill Murray, or the character played by Bill Murray in the movie, actually tries that. He tries to self-delete, like crashing a stolen car off a cliff, or like getting a toaster or some other electronic appliance and just dropping it into the bathtub that he's sitting in. And he just blacks out, and then he wakes up to Sonny and Cher on the clock radio again. So from the Buddhist point of view, it just doesn't work. I mean, at best, you're going to get like 9 months vacation while you're gestating in your next mother's belly. But, I mean, there have been some Dharma teachers like Nisargadatta Maharaj, who denies that there is such a thing as rebirth. And he still accepts the first noble truth of Buddhism, which is to exist is to suffer. So why he didn't just endorse everyone just self-delete, auto-terminate, I don't know. I mean, what's the point of going through all this struggle or whatever? I mean, if you're just going to merge with Brahman, just merge with God at death anyway. So that seemed like a kind of logical flaw in the teachings of Nisargadatta Maharaj. I mean, if you think that when you're dead, you're dead. That's it. I mean, well, you might not have any philosophical qualms against self-deletion other than just the thought that you're going to be causing some serious distress and possible misery to your family and friends. You know, just think of who's going to find the body. Could be some little kid that's going to be scarred for life as a result of that. But from the Buddhist point of view, from the Buddhist point of view, even if you don't believe in rebirth and just go ahead and auto-terminate, it's going to happen anyway. So the main argument against it from a Buddhist perspective is that it's not going to work. You're just going to get reborn, possibly with even worse karma, and you're just going to have to keep doing it over and over again, like on Groundhog Day, until you get it right. So you just stay alive and practice Dhamma so that you're getting closer to this kind of self-deletion, like a spiritual self-deletion or some such, going with Orthodox Theravada Buddhism anyway, to blowing out like a candle flame or a lamp flame. So I guess you can consider that. Those are like the main reasons, I think. And I'm going to move on to the next person, the next questioner, if you will. This is from Hurdy-Gurdy Man. And if I look a little bit distracted, it's because somebody's pulling into the driveway. But I'll just do my best to ignore the nice person who's pulling into the driveway. This is from Hurdy-Gurdy Man. And Hurdy-Gurdy Man says, I recently had a dream that... No, it's like the bell is ringing. Hurdy-Gurdy Man says, I recently had a dream that felt very meaningful. In my dream, I was gifted what looked like a square translucent cloud. I suddenly realized that there were 3 dimensions to the world, but that I had lived my life as if I was in a 2-dimensional one. I felt a wave of realization and relief. When I woke up, my whole body felt light, as if a heavy weight had been removed. How can I continue on the path that the dream tried to show me in practice? How to break free from your own blindness in regards to your possible life paths? Well, reading this, it reminded me that when I was a monk living in a cave in Burma, sometimes I would lie there trying to imagine 4-dimensional objects. And I found that easiest is a sphere because it looks the same from all angles. You're going to have to imagine it differently from different angles if it's not a sphere. In a sphere, I would use time as the 4th dimension and imagine like an object going through time in such a way that when time was turned into a spatial dimension, it would be the right shape in 4 dimensions. So like a 4D hypersphere, you'd start off with a tiny sphere that suddenly appears. It increases in size at like a decelerating rate, reaches a maximum size, and then starts decreasing at an accelerating rate until it disappears again. And then you just replay that short-term memory, and then kind of crystallize that into something static, and then you can sort of imagine what a 4D hypersphere would look like. With regard to a 4D hypercube, then easiest by far is looking at it straight on. Just like your line of sight would be perpendicular to the side of the hypercube that's closest to you. And then all of a sudden it would just be a 4D, like a 3-dimensional cube, just suddenly appearing and then suddenly disappearing. If you looked at it from an angle, like a 45-degree angle looking right down at one of the corners, then you'd be seeing the 4D cube, like from that same angle, just suddenly appear, increase at a steady rate, and then immediately decrease at a steady rate until it was gone. And then you'd replay that in your memory and try and take the whole elapsed time of your short-term memory of that shape changing size or whatever, and then just kind of crystallize that into something static and just add that into a 4th dimension of space. But I don't know if that's going to actually help Hurdy-Gurdy Man very much. from the traditional Buddhist point of view, you want like like some kind of transcendent realization. You just have to practice Dhamma. You can't really imagine what is beyond your experience. So, I mean, we probably are existing in more than the 3.5 dimensions that we're aware of. 3 dimensions of space plus like a half dimension of time, because we are blind to the future. We can kind of predict, but our predictions often turn out to be wrong because we don't really see the future. We're just guessing about it. At best, we're extrapolating. And with regard to some things like in science, you know, if so long as the laws of nature don't change, then you can make predictions that are relatively reliable. You know when the next lunar eclipse is going to be, that kind of thing. So long as the rules don't change. And that's just one of the articles of faith of scientism, is that the rules won't change. That's just has to be taken on faith. I mean, you can kind of extrapolate. They haven't changed noticeably very much yet. But getting back to Hurdy-Gurdy Man's question here, you want some kind of transcendent, like, multi-dimensional enlightenment experience, or just like some kind of, what's the word? Short of enlightenment, just some kind of transcendent experience that will allow you to transcend certain limitations that you're under right now. Then practice Dhamma. Just do intensive meditation. From an orthodox Theravada point of view, even then you won't be able to see the future, because according to Theravada, time and space are pretty much Newtonian rather than Einsteinian, and there's only one point in time that really exists. And that's one thing about like Abhidhamma philosophy, official orthodox Theravada Buddhist philosophy, that is difficult for me to accept, because I think there's a good chance there's more dimensions than the ones we are aware of. I mean, hypothetically, there could be an infinite number of dimensions. I mean, you can produce multi-dimensional arrays on a computer. You can have a 7-dimensional array in a computer, no problem. So, let's see. The actual question here, it looks like 2 question marks. How can I continue on the path that the dream tried to show me in practice? Well, for starters, just have that as a kind of ideal. Just kind of treasure that as a sort of ideal in your heart. Kind of yearn for it. And you don't even necessarily have to do anything, just that yearning. You know, it's like the Upanishad says, whatever a man directs his mind toward, that does he become. And Paul Lowe, who was one of my favorite teachers, spiritual teachers who was still alive until I found out that he died a few years ago, he was saying with regard to enlightenment in general, you know, you have to desire it with all your heart and not necessarily do anything. Just that yearning for it is going to get you farther than any kind of cookbook method. So I guess that would be one way of continuing on the path, although the more orthodox Buddhist, or at least Theravada Buddhist path would be practice, you know, Sila Samadhi Panya. You know, just be moral and virtuous and practice meditation, you know, do good, refrain from doing evil, and purify the mind. That's the first question mark. The second question mark of Hurdy-Gurdy Man is how to break free from your own blindness in regards to your possible life paths. And that's a tricky one, because it's, I mean, in Buddhism, it would be more moha than blindness. You know, it's usually translated as delusion or ignorance. I think it comes close to something like semi-conscious stupidity. And to the extent that you have moha, to that same extent, you don't know that you have it. To the extent that you know that you are ignorant or delusional or insane, to that same extent, you're not really that way. Yeah, at least it's like one of my favorite verses of the Dhammapada. I think it's verse 63, is the man who is aware of his foolishness is at least wise to that extent. So you can't really know just how delusional you are. I mean, that's part of the delusion. So in that case, still the best you can do is just practice like conscientiously, as wholeheartedly as you can manage, as diligently as you can manage, and you will make progress. And there's no guarantee that you're going to have some multidimensional breakthrough, some transcendent breakthrough, but it definitely increases the odds of that happening. So I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from the Saboteur, formerly known as the Saboteurs, but he kind of unified himself and became singular instead of plural. And the Saboteur says, what is the karma for deleting pests such as mice, flies, etc. inside the home? I am loath to delete mice, but what can you do? I had a cat, but it was eaten by a fox. I live on the edge of a forest in Poland. Well, I mean, you could get another cat, maybe a bigger, tougher cat, or maybe you could even get like a pet fox, because foxes do not practice cannibalism very much. Or you could get like a rat terrier or something, which might not be much use against flies, but it would probably keep the rodent population down. Get some little terrier that was bred for that sort of thing. But getting to the actual question here, I guess there's two question marks in this question also. So it's a double question. What is the karma for deleting pests such as mice, flies, etc. inside the home? Well, I mean, it's not good. It's not good karma, especially from like the Orthodox Buddhist point of view. Killing a living being is about the worst thing you can do. But the act itself is going to, I mean, the ethical quality of the act itself is going to depend on your mental states. So, I mean, if you're just hating them, killing them, just taking glee in smashing them, that kind of thing, you're going to get a lot worse karma than if you have just this kind of utilitarian attitude. But even then, when you're killing living beings, it's very difficult to avoid getting any bad karma at all, because there's going to be like a subconscious empathy thing going on, or whatever it is. Even if you're unaware of any kind of negative motivations, still there's a very good chance that they're going to be there. You know, just because some terrorist thinks he's going to go to heaven for blowing up a school bus full of children, I mean, just because he doesn't think he's done anything wrong doesn't mean that he hasn't done anything wrong enough that he's going to get some really bad karma for that. So, yeah, I mean, it is kind of a tough one, and that's one reason why there is the Sangha of monks. I mean, you live a household life, you have sort of layman's duties. Like, even if you're willing to put up with mice and flies in your house, still, if you have children and your children come home from school with lice in their hair, then, I mean, you'd be a poor excuse of a parent if you just say, well, I'm not going to harm the poor little mice or lice. You know, you just let your kid continue having lice or intestinal worms or whatever, just because you don't want to harm the poor parasites. That's one reason why there's a Sangha, because so long as you're living in the world, there's many opportunities for this kind of duty to do like an unskillful act to arise. So you just renounce the home life and go and live under a tree, and then you just put up with the flies and the mice and the mosquitoes and that sort of thing. You just use that as just a practice in equanimity or patience, maybe even metta, loving kindness. But yeah, I mean, you're going to be taking a karmic hit for like exterminating vermin from your house or from anywhere, really. So, I mean, if you got a cat or a fox or like a little terrier dog that would at least kind of keep the rodents at bay, you know, I mean, they'd only have to kill a few to set an example, and the rest would probably clear out, unless it's just really infested. But still, you're going to have flies buzzing around, that kind of thing. I mean, for a long time, I used to just catch, you have a spider or like a silverfish or a fly in the house. You just catch it and let it go outside. I mean, you can do that unless you're just completely overwhelmed with them. So yeah, I mean, you're going to have to draw the line somewhere, I guess. You're going to have to decide just how much you're willing to put up with for the sake of not violating some Buddhist precept and creating unskillful, unwholesome karma in the process. It's not bad karma because it's breaking a precept. It's breaking a precept because it's like making bad karma for yourself in one of the stereotypical, usual ways for human beings. And killing is right up there at the top of the list for lay people. For monks, there's a worse thing than killing, and that's deliberately lying about having attained superhuman mental states like psychic powers or enlightenment itself. That's considered to be even worse than killing an animal. And I might as well mention that I think it's the commentarial tradition to the rules of monastic discipline. They point out that it's more unskillful to kill a big animal than a small animal because it requires more effort. And I really can't accept that explanation in the Theravada Buddhist commentaries. Because, I mean, sometimes, to kill an elephant, you just take a shot at it with a high-powered rifle. It might take some effort to go and find one first, but the actual killing of it could be relatively easy. If you're like culling a herd on a wildlife refuge or something, you just stand there on the back of your Land Rover or whatever and pop. Whereas a mosquito, I know from my own personal experience, years and years ago, you could spend half an hour just furiously cussing and raging at this little bastard that's maybe so tiny you can hear it, but you can't see it very well. And it's like, finally, when you deliver the fatal blow, you're just like roaring in triumph. So it's probably more a matter of like this empathic connection deep down that all beings have, even though it's really not mentioned all that much, if at all, in Orthodox Theravada Buddhism. Once you get to a certain level of spiritual advancement, you can know the minds of other beings. But personally, I think it's always there in a latent form, like a subconscious form. It's just that when you become, you reach a certain level in your spiritual practice, then it becomes conscious and not just subconscious. But it's always there, I'm pretty sure. But, at least you'd be reducing the bad karma by just getting another cat or some such and get a tough one that the foxes can't kill, maybe. And I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from County Jail Kama Sutra. He asked this question some time ago. I told him that, he had asked the question just shortly after I had answered it from somebody else on a different Q&A. But rather than look up my answer to that question, which could take some time digging through old Q&A videos, he just wants me to answer it again. So, County Jail Kama Sutra says, how did you become certain that your meditation practice had reached a peak in this life and was not going to improve? That was one of the factors of your disrobing. Sometimes you can drive hundreds of miles through Nevada and not feel like you're getting anywhere because the landscape is all the same. How did you test that you actually weren't progressing? And first of all, he says, how did you become certain that your meditation practice had reached? I never really became certain. Sometimes you just have to go with probabilities. You're going with just the available evidence. And then you make a hypothesis or a best guess, an educated guess off of that. So, I wasn't 100% certain that my meditation practice or my Dhamma practice, my spiritual development had reached a peak in this life and was not going to improve. It was just that it evidently was the case that my meditation not only was not getting better, but had declined over a period of like more than 10 years, like 15 years. So it's like when your best meditation is between 1999 and 2004, thereabouts. And then after that, you're not even able to get up to the same level that you got, during that time frame. And it's like you get like a little glimmer of it every now and then, but still it's like my meditation was not only not improving, but it was I had sort of backslid, had retrogressed back to a lower level and pretty much stayed there. So that was essentially what happened. I mean, like I've said before several times at this point, I mean, when something stops working for several years, then it's a fairly good indication that maybe you should try something different. And I can understand the driving hundreds of miles through Nevada and you don't feel like you're getting anywhere. And like St. John of the Cross had his dark night of the soul analogy, or just dark night of the soul, where it's considered to be like a prerequisite to real spiritual progress when you just reach this aridity, just no consolation at all. You don't seem to be making any progress, anything like that. But I mean, this was like going on for well over 10 years. And I remember back around 1999, back when I was just starting to get into the best meditation I ever got to, I was just thinking of being like I was founding the Rocky Balboa School of Buddhism, where in the first Rocky movie, by far the best Rocky movie in my opinion, Rocky was too humble to really want to win the big championship fight with Apollo Creed. For him to win the fight was not even, it wasn't part of his agenda. He was not striving or aspiring to that. All he wanted to do was just stay on his feet the full 12 rounds. Just not get beaten down. Just to stay on his feet. And so I remember back around 1999, or even before that, 1998, somewhere around there, just thinking, it's like, even if I make no significant progress, at least I'm staying out of trouble. Just stay on my feet the full 12 rounds of my monkhood, so to speak. But again, when it just stagnates for year after year after year, and you're just really, and it just becomes like a chore, especially if your meditation is so like destabilized. You got to go back to like the ABCs, labeling everything, that kind of stuff. It just gets really demoralizing and you just lose enthusiasm. And that's one of the most important things to have as a monk, is enthusiasm for practice, not just, just forcing yourself to endure this chore. So eventually I decided to try something else, and that's what I'm doing. And I'm going to move on to the next question. This is from CO Vaction Sipad Zidana. He says, "You have said many ways that changing your perception is the best way to change your life." Maybe it means you have said many times. Let's just go with that. "You have said many times that changing your perception is the best way to change your life, like someone quitting smoking immediately when they learn their leg will rot off. You have lived 30 years as a strict monk trying to follow every rule obsessively. What changed your perception that caused such a radical change in lifestyle from when you were going to parties in college and being a normie?" Well, I'd already changed my mind before even going to college. I just went through this crisis when I was 16 years old, right around my 17th birthday, starting before the 17th birthday. So 16 years old, I just like rebelled against society. It's a long story. I've told it before. It's like little kids, as a general rule, just assume that adults have got it all figured out. They know what's what. And then by the time I was about 13, it was starting to become kind of iffy. I was starting to seriously question that hypothesis. And by the time I was 16, it became woefully obvious that the adults didn't know what's what any more than I did. In fact, some of them seemed to be even more messed up than I was as a 16-year-old. And I just went into rebellion. It's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to just be like a salmon and swim upstream, spawn, and die. I don't want to just be some normie materialist, he who dies with the most toys wins, that kind of thing. And so I just started partying, just rebelling, just refusing to follow any rule I didn't want to follow, which got me into a hell of a lot of trouble. I learned a heck of a lot that 1 year, like my junior year of high school. I mean, I might have learned more in that 1 year just through just these wild experiences than I had learned in school itself up till that point. But I mean, it was just like this roller coaster ride, ecstasy, misery, just fun and the opposite. I mean, it was just very like agitating, just very disorienting, getting into trouble again and again, causing my family to get very upset with me again and again. And so I had like this crisis. And then it was when I had the crisis, I was just like not knowing what to do, just at wit's end. Then my father, he gave me some choices. One of them being see a youth counselor. So I went to see the youth counselor because that was easier than just moving out of the house, that kind of thing. And so turned out the youth counselor was a spiritual man who started giving me books by Ram Dass to read. Also gave me Illusions by, what's his name, Richard Bach. And it was just like an answer to my question, and just sort of filled a gap that I was desperately looking for. And I just really accepted it. I mean, at first, like I've said before, like reading Ram Dass, I mean, I couldn't really integrate it into my body of knowledge very well because it was so different, like so alien from what I was used to, that you couldn't really make good connections, to integrate this new knowledge in with your older knowledge. It was just, I didn't understand. It was just kind of over my head, but still I got this intuitive feeling. Yeah, this is better than just being a complete materialist, working 9 to 5 with the wife and the kids and the house in the suburbs and everything, or just getting into trouble, just partying all the time and, experimenting with hallucinogenic drugs and this kind of thing. I mean, this seemed like better than either of those two at the time. That was what I needed. So I went for it. And when I became a monk, I mean, I didn't become a monk in order to just conform to what the Asian monks were doing, especially after I realized that they weren't following the rules properly. They sort of like Western Christians. I mean, you compare the Bible to what most Western Christians are doing, there's significant major differences. And it was the same way of, you read about Buddhist monks and you read the rules of monastic discipline and all that, and then you see what real Asian Buddhist monks are doing. There was significant differences. And I did not become a monk in order to just conform with some modern Asian tradition. I wanted to follow what the Buddha himself actually taught, which included following these rules. It wasn't exactly obsessive, except maybe at first. Once you get it into a habit, then you just do it without really thinking about it all that much. It just becomes second nature. But usually it takes some kind of crisis to really change the way you think about things, change the way you see the world. It takes some kind of crisis where your old ways of dealing with the world just aren't working anymore. And so then all of a sudden, you're open to suggestion. And people have known this for a long time. At least some people in authority have known this for a long time. So like Chinese thought reform works this way, and like some religions kind of work this way where they cause you to break down and then build you back up as born again kind of a thing. Some military basic training, especially like the elite fighting machine kind of military people, they go through that same kind of thing. If you saw, what was it, Full Metal Jacket, then you know that sometimes it would just break them too much. But still, as a general rule, if you're going to have a significant shift in consciousness, then it takes a kind of crisis that you really can't deal with very well, so that you're like at wit's end. And then it's like you can let go of old like thought patterns and habits and accept new ones way more easily than if everything is running smoothly. And then it's like, so long as everything's running smoothly, you're just set in your ways. You just follow the pre-programmed habits and you don't make much progress. And I'm going to make sure that everything is working correctly. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to move on to CO of Action Sipad Zidana's next question, which is kind of along the same lines. He said, have you ever read or experienced anything in your life that made you think that we can willfully change our perception with choices we can make rather than letting it happen via external circumstances we have no control of? Seems like it would be one of the most important life skills anyone can ever develop if it could be done. And I haven't really heard of that. I mean, if you practice Dhamma or Dharma, then sometimes it can be like this gradual improvement, just mainly through sort of incremental breakthroughs in your meditation, that kind of thing, which can then result over time in a significant shift in consciousness. But willfully changing the way you look at things, I mean, you're having to use your old way of looking at things to change the way you look at things. And it's sort of like trying to like reprogram a computer using the computer's own faulty programming. You know, it's just, it really doesn't work that way. So as a general rule, you're going to have to be thrown into the crisis that's going to make you open to suggestion, make you willing to finally let go of some of these dysfunctional habits and maybe accept some slightly less dysfunctional ones. You know, it's like you have to be beaten over the head with it. You know, a lot of people, they'll have their great breakthrough through a near-death experience, for example. You know, just something horrible happens and it just kind of slams them out of their rut. But just changing the way you perceive things, I mean, it's not something that you really have any control over. I think somebody asked a question similar to this. It might have been in the previous Q&A where just changing your beliefs. You can't just believe something because it's convenient to believe it, or at least I can't. Maybe like a new age kind of person, they're just able to believe damn near anything. But most of us, especially if we have a capacity for critical thought, I mean, you believe what appears to be the most likely to be true based on, you know, the information you have and the way your operating system is operating. And there's going to have to be changes in that before you can change the way you look at things. So, I mean, one way you could do it, of really like changing the way you perceive the world, is just take in lots of unusual information, become very willing to consider points of view that are just very different from your favored point of view. Just be very open-minded as much as you can, and that would at least increase the odds of you getting in enough information that you can significantly change your perceptions. Like the philosophy of Schopenhauer starts with his doctoral thesis, The Fourfold Root of Sufficient Reason, where he's saying that, and one of the four roots of sufficient reason is psychological, where Schopenhauer was saying back before he got famous that under the same circumstances, you're going to have the same like psychological reaction to the same kind of stimuli. And the only way to change your reactions to these stimuli is to change your perceptions, the way you perceive these stimuli. So usually, if it happens like all at once in a major way, like an illuminating way, it's due to a crisis. I mean, it can be like a self-inflicted spiritual crisis, like a lot of saints have undergone, or it can be like from outside. But I mean, you can't just like plan it all out. You know, I'm gonna plan out my crisis like this. I mean, it doesn't work that way. To some degree, you have to get just slammed off your feet. And maybe some people have somehow, I mean, you don't know in advance what the new worldview is going to be like. I mean, if the new worldview is better than the old worldview, then if you really had a good idea of what the new worldview was like, you'd already switch to it. It's just that we're creatures of habit. We cling to our old worldview, and we just are biased in favor of it until we just get overwhelmed with evidence to the contrary. Like, for example, we hit this crisis where our old way of operating just isn't working anymore. So, I mean, it's theoretically possible, I suppose, but still you're not going to know what the new state of consciousness is going to be like, because really you haven't been there. Like St. John of the Cross says, in order to arrive at a place you've never been before, you must go by a road that you do not know. So, I mean, I can accept that it's theoretically possible, I suppose, that you could deliberately work out a way of, like, significantly, radically changing your own worldview. But if it isn't just through taking in lots of information, filling in gaps in your perceptions and that sort of thing, then I don't know how you'd do it. And I'm just going to move on to the next question, also from Siovac and Sipad Zidana. He says, if you had visions that told you that your parents or some other loved one that has passed away is reborn as a certain creature and is suffering from horrible conditions, and you know where they are right now, would you go out of your way to help them even if they have no clue who you are and no relationship would ever form between you? Or do you think our family and friends our family-friend bonds only matter in this life as a product of the emotions and memories that binded us together? Well, if I had a good idea that my father was a dog in like the local dog pound, and if nobody adopted him, that he was going to be euthanized, I would definitely try and help it. I mean, I've mentioned before, I have one dog now that, I mean, it's just like this intuitive kind of guess, but I think there is a possibility that this dog that I have, one of them, may have been like in a previous existence, my human child that got up to maybe a year old, still pre-verbal, and then like died of some like childhood baby disease, which used to happen a heck of a lot in the past. Not so much nowadays, but I mean, infant mortality was very high. And this dog, I mean, first of all, it's about the right size of like a human baby. It's got just this round head, has almost no snout at all. And it's the most intelligent dog we've got. It's like, you know how a baby will just sit in its high chair and just kind of like coolly observe everything that's going on? You know, the dog does that sometimes. It'll like sit in a chair and just kind of gaze at everybody, just kind of looking at you with this seemingly thoughtful expression. It's by far the most conscientious dog we've got. So, I mean, there's a possibility. I mean, it doesn't necessarily make me love the dog anymore, although there is just this sort of a bond between us that may be through like partly due to just this karmic connection we already had from a previous existence. So that kind of thing is possible, I suppose. But, I mean, it wouldn't just be some like intellectual knowledge that this being was my brother or father in this life. You know, they died and then just got reborn as an animal or something. It wouldn't just be an intellectual knowledge like that. I mean, there'd still be like unresolved karma between you that might help to draw you into another interaction. But still, I mean, if I knew for a fact that some person that I really cared for had been reborn as an animal that was in need of help, then I would try to help that animal. I mean, if they were like in China or something, where it might be really prohibitively difficult to get there, I might not be as keen on it as if it was just nearby. But let's get to the actual question mark here again, because sometimes I'll start answering a question and then I just kind of start rambling until I've kind of lost sight of what the actual question was. So let's see here. Would you go out of your help them if they had no clue who you are and no relationship would ever form between you? Well, Yeah, but still deep down at like this subconscious level, there still would be a relationship going on. And there's a good chance that even though at a surface level, they wouldn't know that they were my father in the previous life or something, still there would be like this deep down connection, I think. Let's see, or do you think our family friend bonds only matter in this life as a product of the emotions and memories that... No, it goes deeper than that. And I would try to help if I could. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Maitreya Buddha. And Maitreya Buddha says, what are your thoughts on the Brahmani or Brahmi script being found in Roman-occupied Egypt? Would it be from Ashoka's need to proselytize Buddhism all across the known world? I kind of doubt it. I mean, there might be some vestiges of that, but if they found like Indian script in Egypt, like Roman Egypt, in all likelihood, the most likely cause for that is that there was commerce going back and forth between the Roman Empire and India. And the closest province with regard to trade routes and so forth would have been Egypt. They didn't have a Suez Canal back then, but sometimes at least they had a canal that connected one of the branches of the Nile, like near the Delta, to the Red Sea. So you could have ships going from India to Alexandria. Alexandria was this big port, it was very cosmopolitan, people from lots of different countries, including India, like Indian merchants, people supporting the Indian merchants, like warehouses and that kind of thing from India were living in Roman Egypt, especially like Alexandria. Probably there would be ports, like smaller ports along the Red Sea, where there would also be shipping fleets and trade going between India and Rome. India and Roman Egypt. So you have enough sailors and merchants that are Indian living in Roman Egypt, like Alexandria. There's a good chance they might like bring some monks, Buddhist monks, that kind of thing. Or, there could be just like this ethnic enclave, like an Indian quarter in Roman Alexandria. Not because of Ashoka's missionaries, but just because of a lot of commercial trade going between Roman Egypt and India. And I have read long ago that one of the many reasons why the Roman Empire finally collapsed, one of the many reasons was depletion of precious metals in Rome due to a trade deficit. Like, the Romans wanted all kinds of stuff from India. They wanted the jewels and they wanted the spices and that kind of thing. But the Indians didn't really want any like products from Rome other than just silver and gold. They just wanted the money. And so it resulted in just exporting precious metals out of Rome until there was depleted funds for the treasury. And that was one of the many reasons why the money got debased. They're just mixing lots of lead and other things in with the silver, for example. So there was definitely a lot significant commerce between the Roman Empire and India. There probably a little bit of overland trade routes also, but that went through Persia, which was like enemy territory, and there'd be like high duties and so forth. Probably cheaper just to go by ship from Egypt to India and from India to Egypt. So that would probably be the main reason why you're finding inscriptions in Indian languages in like Roman era Egypt. Maybe a little bit of vestigial Buddhism from Ashoka's missions, but probably not nearly as much later cultural influences due to commercial trade between the two countries. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Siddhartha Lohachita. And this is kind of an easy question. He says, would you agree to guillotine the mainstream politicians from the West? And no, I would not agree to guillotine the mainstream politicians from the West for two main reasons. I mean, first of all, it's mass murder, which is not good. But also, in all likelihood, you guillotine the mainstream politicians from the West, and the next crop of politicians might be on their best behavior up until they can manage to outlaw guillotining politicians, and then they're just going to go right back to the status quo, which is the way politicians have been since politicians were invented. So it would just be taking on like horrible karma for something that's going to be futile in the long run anyway. So I'm just going to move on to Siddhartha Lohachita's next question, which is, have you ever heard about minarchism? And then in parentheses, he has this explanation: small states like Andorra or Monaco, or loosely governed medieval European kingdoms. And I mean, minarchism, it doesn't mean like miniature government. I mean, it doesn't mean like small countries. This could just be some kind of miscommunication. I don't think Siddhartha Lohachita was necessarily implying that minarchism applies only to tiny countries like Andorra or Monaco or little feudalist states in Europe. Because minarchism just means a minimum of government. And the first time I ever heard the word minarchist was from Styx Hexenhammer 666, who's this political commentator on YouTube. And he would sometimes claim to be a minarchist, which is sort of like a anarcho-capitalist. You know, it's like libertarian, you know, it's just a minimum government. And I looked it up. I looked up a definition for minarchism. And it says here, minarchism is a political philosophy advocating for a minimum state or a minimal state where the government's only role is to protect individual rights, such as through the military, police, and courts, while leaving all other functions to free markets. This concept is closely associated with libertarianism and is often referred to as a night watchman state. So, I mean, to some degree, I mean, libertarianism and like classical liberalism really aren't that different. I mean, so long as you still have a military, at least the government can fend off attacks, especially if they've got a superior military. I mean, too much libertarianism, too much anarchy, I really don't think it's realistic. But, I mean, if you have just the minimum amount necessary to, like, what is it here? Like, protect individual rights and protect the country. You still got police and so forth. I mean, that's not too far from what the founding fathers of the United States were going for. We got a lot bigger centralized government now than we did, like, in 1780. So the United States in 1780 was pretty much minarchist, I think. It is too bad. I mean, I will mention, since I already mentioned Styx Hexenhammer 666, he appears to be crashing hard, and I think he may be going to jail just because he's kind of non-conformed himself into trouble with the law. As we speak, I think he's hiding from the police. So I've kind of switched over to Asmongold as my edgy political commentator, my source of edgy political commentary on YouTube. At least he's kind of replaced Styx as the main one. It's really a shame. But getting back to the actual question here, have you ever heard about minarchism? Yeah, I mean, just Styx Hexenhammer 666 occasionally declaring himself to be a minarchist. I mean, that was all I heard about minarchism. Although, of course, I've heard plenty about like the anarcho-capitalism, which arguably could be considered like extreme far right, like the exact opposite of communism. Especially if the communism is an anarcho-communism, which I really don't think it could be. People talk about anarcho-communism, but communism mainly only works at the point of a gun. You got to have a strong centralized government to make sure everybody is obedient to the communist agenda. So, I mean, whether Andorra and Monaco really are minarchist or not, or whether Siddhartha Lohachita just thought that minarchism meant tiny governments because they're governing tiny countries. I'm not sure. But I mean, Andorra and Monaco are nowhere near to being world powers. A lot of rich people go to Monaco to gamble, I suppose. So they probably have a pretty good economy going. Let's see. Yeah, so I've heard about it, but I mean, it's just kind of another word for like anarcho-capitalism, that kind of thing. And I mean, I am fine with minimal government. Too much government is not good. Not enough government's not good either. But I mean, you have to at least have someone maintaining order that is agreed upon by the democratic majority. Or possibly even better yet, you've got like one of the wisest people in the whole country who's also really clever and courageous and everything is appointed some dictator, like the philosopher king. Benevolent dictatorship. Problem with benevolent dictatorship, though, is you kind of surrender your rights to the dictator, and then the next dictator might not be nearly as wise or nice of a guy. Consider the alleged son of Marcus Aurelius, who was a good emperor, Commodus, who was not a good emperor. So anyways, I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from Arpad, RPAD. Let's see, I'm going to make sure I don't skip over. Sometimes I'll just scroll right past a question without noticing it. Okay, RPAD, Arpad. He says, when you were a monk, did you ever experience back pain as a result of sleeping on a hard bedding? Not exactly back pain, kind of back pain. As a general rule, I sleep on my side. I've got kind of a sway back, and if I lie on my back, especially if it's on a hard surface, it's just my shoulders and my behind are sort of the base of an arch, and my back isn't actually against the bed, and then it puts strain on my back and becomes uncomfortable relatively quickly. But my first year as a monk, my first several months, or first few months at least, as a monk, I was getting pain like where the ribs would join the spine. The connections between my ribs and their origin in the backbone, that was becoming sore. And it took me a little while to figure out that it's because all of a sudden I'm sleeping, instead of on a futon, which I slept on as a layperson, I'm sleeping on this little like 3/8 of an inch foam camping mat that's on plywood. And probably what happened was it was just so hard that it was sort of just like pushing, like compressing my ribs up into my spine. And it was sore for a few months. And then I just got used to it. I mean, your body just kind of like strengthens the weak parts, the parts that are getting excessive strain, just like the cartilage or whatever it is, gets reinforced there. And then I was fine. It never troubled me again. So, yeah, I did experience kind of back pain. It's like where the rib bones and the vertebrae were joining just from the pressure. I guess that was my best guess from sleeping on a hard surface all of a sudden. But you just get used to it. I mean, I still have calluses on my hips from all the years of sleeping on hard floors. Sometimes I just sleep on just bare concrete. One place where I lived, One Bow Wildlife Refuge Monastery, I was literally sleeping on bare concrete with a piece of wood for a pillow, not out of a desire to be ascetic, but in order to be as comfortable as possible, because it was so hot there. Just the blazing hot wastelands of like central Burma. It's really hot, even inside of caves sometimes. And so the coolest place to be is right on the floor, on the cool cement, relatively cool cement. And I used a piece of wood for a pillow, mainly because like any kind of cloth would just be soaking up sweat and would start smelling like an old gym sock within a few days. Hardwood pillow, you just kind of props your head up a little bit. You maybe put like a washcloth over that if you wanted to. And I mean, you can just wipe the sweat and the skin oil off of it. And it's good to go. And if it was so hot that after a while I'd be lying in a puddle of my own sweat, I could just get up and move several feet and lie back down where the cement was cool there still. But yeah, aside from that one time when I first started being a monk, first started sleeping on something hard, or maybe it was even before I had even ordained as a monk, because I remember when I first, like early on when I was a monk, I was trying not to even lie down at all. It took a while to get used to, but I was trying to do the sitter's practice, which is one of the Dhutangas where you sleep in a sitting position. But it may have been even before I was a monk, where just sleeping on this little foam pad, 3/8 of an inch thick, that's just spread over plywood. Yeah, it was causing some pain, but I just healed up and got used to it. So our pad's next question is, if so, how would you relieve the pain? And I just put up with it. I mean, it wasn't just agonizing. It was just kind of a dull ache until it just cleared up on its own. I don't recall ever taking even aspirin or anything for it, although I suppose you could have done something like that, ibuprofen or something. But I just toughed it out until it just got better. And so I'm just going to move on to Arpad's next question. Was it difficult to come back to a normal Western-style mattress? No, it was way too easy, because my plan was to just get like a futon and just start sleeping on a futon again. And yeah, women, they want like a nice big mattress. So if I was going to be sleeping in the same place as a woman, my sweetheart, then it was not really debatable. She was just insisted. So I just wound up sleeping on, at least I got a firm mattress, not some really squishy one. But yeah, there was no difficulty at all just sleeping on that. I use too many pillows now too. So I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Rui. And Rui says, let's see, I want to scroll down a little bit here. Okay, we still got some questions here. Rui says, is it good form when preparing a meal for a mendicant to ask him, quote, do you like spicy? Do you eat carrots? Are you a fan of lobster? Unquote, and so forth. When I was a monk, I really didn't like it when people would ask me what kind of food I liked, or they'd offer me food and then they'd say, well, did you like that? And I mean, a monk's just supposed to have equanimity. He's not supposed to say, yeah, and that was really good. I mean, some monks do, or, just being polite or whatever. But it seems to me a better approach to say something along the lines of, Venerable Sir, in the event that I offer food, are there any dietary restrictions that I should be aware of? Are you allergic to any kind of food? Are you a vegetarian? Is there any kind of food that you particularly dislike? If you absolutely hate something, just let me know and I'll be careful not to offer that to you, that kind of thing. That would probably be preferable to asking him, do you like this? Do you like that? It's just kind of leave it more open where, it's like, are there any dietary restrictions that I should be aware of? If you just won't eat certain things, just let me know. I won't offer it, or that kind of thing. That would probably work better. And if they're allergic to something, they're like lactose intolerant, that kind of thing. That could be helpful to know. And I'm just moving on to the next question. This is from Austin. And Austin says, do you support the war effort? And would you support the idea of boots on the ground? So that's actually two questions, isn't it? You got to count those question marks. I'm going to separate these. Okay, first question is, do you support the war effort? And I am assuming that the people who are planning out this war effort in the United States government, Donald Trump, Rubio, Hegseth, those guys, they know what they're doing way the hell more than I know what they're doing. I mean, war from a Buddhist point of view is murder, mass murder. But from a political point of view, it can be justified. I've said it several times before, at least, that when I was a young man, I lost interest in politics, didn't really keep up with politics much, after I realized that what is good and right from a spiritual or ethical point of view is not necessarily what is good and right from a political point of view. From a political point of view, who knows, maybe the Third Punic War was justified, even though from an ethical point of view, it was essentially just mass murder. For those of you who are up on Roman history, you may know what the Third Punic War was. I mean, the Carthaginians didn't have a chance. They were just wiped out. So, with regard to the war effort, I mean, I'm ambivalent, let's say. I mean, I'm willing to give the government and Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt and assume that they know what they're doing. I mean, if this just turns into another Iraq, another Vietnam, another Afghanistan, then that's not going to be good for America, certainly not going to be good for Donald Trump. And I assume he knows that. So that's a consideration. I mean, there are some people, I've encountered them pretty much daily, who are just firmly of the opinion that this whole Iran thing is Donald Trump kissing the ass and obeying Netanyahu, that he's just a puppet of Israel. And I mean, there's probably an element of that, partly just because like America is more pro-Israel than almost any other country on earth, aside from Israel itself. You know, just because of the evangelical Christians and all that, who still believe that the Jews are God's chosen people because the Bible says so. But, I mean, I think the main reason for the whole Iran thing was part of the whole main reason for Venezuela, that it's an attempt to deal with troublesome allies of China, to defend the petrodollar, this kind of thing, to prevent China from becoming the undisputed world power. And China really hasn't done very much thus far, other than some strongly worded protests like the United Nations and this kind of thing. But getting back to the very short, simple question, do you support the war effort? I don't oppose it. I mean, from an ethical point of view, killing people is wrong. But from a political point of view, sometimes it's justified. And I'm just assuming that somebody there knows what they're doing. That they're not just stupidly dragging the United States into another Vietnam or Iraq. Obviously, it's taken longer than Venezuela took. Venezuela was just one night, boom. So, let's just move on to Austin's second question, which is a follow-up of the first question. Would you support the idea of boots on the ground? That would be another step that, I mean, just the American people in general would not support the idea of boots on the ground unless it was just like boots just touching the ground and back off again like happened in Venezuela. If there's gonna be a meat grinder, hundreds or thousands of American military personnel coming back in body bags, then, I mean, that's it. I mean, Trump has to have enough intelligence to know that people are going to be voting Democrat for another decade because of that. Probably. So, I mean, under certain circumstances, maybe. But, yeah, I don't think it would be a good idea. Even if it were necessary to accomplish certain things, it would be better to just have the Israeli soldiers with their boots on the ground, or even Saudi Arabian soldiers with their boots on the ground. Just get foreign auxiliaries to do the fighting for us on the ground in that case, and we just provide air support and logistics and all that. Seems to me that would be a better idea. And so I'm just moving on to Austin's third question, which is something completely different. Austin says, is baseline awareness static or dynamic? And I'm not exactly sure what baseline awareness would be, like what Austin has in mind when he asks that question. Baseline awareness. Is it just like being awake when you're not really thinking anything? Sort of like if you're in a jhanic state, then it would be more static than dynamic. I mean, just you get to like the ultimate baseline awareness of like Brahman, infinite formless consciousness. Then, I mean, it would just be beyond time. It would contain infinite dynamics, like in potential, conditionally, virtually within that, but it would just be beyond time. It'd be formless. There'd be nothing to change because it's formless. So, I mean, when you get to the ultimate capital U, ultimate baseline awareness, then it would be essentially static, or at least static would apply better than dynamic would. But if you get to just the state of being awake when you're not thinking anything, it would have to be a balance of static and dynamic. Pure static would just be like death. There'd be no change. So long as you're still in time, then static, I mean, you'd just be stuck in a single moment. There'd be no change. There'd be no awareness of moving on to anything else. Whereas, I mean, so there'd have to be at least enough dynamic element that there's at least like a background hum of vitality or some such that is still moving you through time, so to speak, if that makes any sense. It couldn't be purely dynamic because like total change would just be chaos. There'd be no like individual observer remaining the same from one moment to the next. So it's like dependently co-arising in like human consciousness. You have to have this balance of stasis and change. They have to stay in balance. And I just got distracted because one of my sparkling pygmy gouramis just clicked over there. They make these clicking sounds. It's really cool. But getting back to dependent co-arising, you have to, they arise like stasis and change have to, I mean, you can't have one without the other, not in any meaningful way. So you have to have something staying the same and something changing that can be sort of contrasted against the something that stayed the same. If everything stays the same, that's death, unless you're just completely transcended the whole samsaric like space and time. But if everything is just completely dynamic with nothing staying the same, then it's just pure chaos. It's just like static on an old TV screen. I mean, it wouldn't even get that far. So the ultimate awareness, this infinite formless consciousness, it would be timeless and formless. So static, I guess, would apply better than dynamic would. But when you get into like anything recognizably human awareness, then there has to be this balance. But if it's just baseline awareness, then there'd be a lot of stasis in that the changes would be very subtle. The changes moving you from one moment to the next in your awareness would be very subtle, but still there. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Terzaskaziz. And Terzaskaziz says, do different English translations of the Sutta Nipāta work the same way as Bible translations? One is literal, one paraphrase, and another anywhere in between, or are they all literal? Well, I mean, even the most literal translation from Pali into English is going to have at least a little bit of paraphrase, because if you just do an exact word for word translation, it's going to come out almost like gibberish. You know, it's like you can come close, but still there's going to be certain things that just don't translate smoothly, and you're going to have to like smooth off the edges in order to make it read in this flow that seems like real English. But the best translations are fairly literal. Like Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations are about as literal as they get. Ajahn Thanissaro's translations are pretty much literal, but at the same time, he has like this idiosyncratic, self-indulgent translation method of using like sort of idiosyncratic, self-indulgent renderings of terms that I've discussed previously. And so, I mean, you can call it fairly literal. He understands what he's reading. It's just that his personality just blends in with the translation, so that in the past, when I was a monk reading some of his translations, it would occur to me, especially when he's translating verses, that it would occur to me, it's like every few lines he should just say, "Here I am, Ajahn Tanisro, translating this." Because like a good translation, in a good translation, the translator should be as invisible and unobtrusive as possible. It should be as close as possible to the effect you would have if you were reading it in the original language, if you were fluent in the original language. But there's one translation of the Sutta Nipāta that I have seen. It was translated by a Sri Lankan monk, I'm pretty sure, and it's just paraphrased. And like the rhinoceros horn discourse, the Kagawisana Sutta, he has translated as the unicorn. And he just talks about unicorns instead of the rhinoceros, the Indian rhinoceros that has one horn. So yeah, you're going to find different translations, like Caroline Rhys-Davids, one of the early translators of Pali into English for the Pali Text Society. She was more of a paraphrase kind of a person. She had this really affected, flowery kind of writing style, like the Therigatha, elders' verses, literally. She has translated as Psalms of the Brethren, this kind of thing. So yeah, there is kind of a spectrum of, literal to paraphrase, but they tend more towards the literal side, especially the good translations that you're more likely to see. But that reminds me, I used to know an Australian monk in Burma who was translating the Bhikkhuni Patimokkha, the Patimokkha rules for nuns. And when I read it, and other people made the same comment, I mean, it's not a translation. All he's doing is paraphrasing what the commentaries say. Just sometimes it's nowhere near to being word for word. He's not translating the actual Pali itself at all. He's just looking up how the commentary defines the rule, and then just writing that down. So that was this very loose paraphrase, if you could even call it paraphrase. So I mean, it happens, but his translation was not scholarly enough, I think, to have really struck traction, and I don't know if anyone ever reads it. But I wasn't the only person that pointed this out to him. I mean, it's not even really a translation. You're just saying what the commentary says it means, not what it actually says right there in the Pali. So it does happen. And I'm moving on to Trzaska's next question, which is as follows. He says, I was looking on Amazon to see if your new book is out. When will it be? And I am still waiting for the artwork, especially the cover art. I mean, I could just write off any kind of interior illustrations, but I don't even have the cover art for the cover of the book. The book is practically done, almost everything except for like the cover art and the cover design. I got to put the words and stuff once I get the cover art. The back matter on the blurb on the back of the book, that kind of thing. And then I gotta like apply for like the Library of Congress number or whatever. Gotta put that in, that kind of thing. So I'm still waiting for the artwork. Even the artist's mama has been kind of pestering her about it. And I'm just gonna move on to the next question. This is from Avenity. And Avenity says, after I look at the clock, Avenity says, do you ever have moments where something small, like a smell or a sound, suddenly reminds you of your old life in Burma? And it does happen, not very often, but it does occasionally happen. For example, there's a smell, and I think the technical name for this smell is petrichor, stone blood. That's the official name for the smell is petrichor, which happens like during the first rain or right before the first rain, after it has been hot and dry for a long period. And it's this wonderful smell. It's almost like baking bread, sort of a cross between baking bricks and baking bread. And I never smelled, when I lived in the Pacific Northwest, it just rains all the time and it never gets really super hot. So I just never smelled that smell. And then I come to Burma and I'm living in a semi-desert area, tropical semi-desert. And it's just, you get this smell right before the first rain in a long time. And it's sort of like a hallelujah kind of a smell because, I mean, it's good when it rains in the desert. And then coming back to South Carolina, every once in a while, like in the summertime, if it rains in the summertime, you get a little bit of that smell, and that reminds me of Burma. Other things, like if I see a small lizard running on the front porch or something, it can remind me of like the little house geckos in Burma, that sort of thing. Hear like a loudspeaker off in the distance, that definitely reminds me of living in Burma, because you've always got a loudspeaker off in the distance in Burma. Burmese people, third world people in general, just do not like silence. They like noise. So you've always got loudspeakers and that kind of stuff going on in the distance. So, yeah, that would be my answer to that question. And I'm just going to move on to the next one, which is from Ethiopian Fake Tig. And Ethiopian Fake Tig says, considering how both Christians and Buddhists believe in heaven and hell, could Christians technically be worshiping a small g god, a deva in the highest heaven realm, when their purpose was technically to escape samsara, but now wish to not die and instead go to heaven by doing good deeds, which technically can get you into heaven in Buddhist mythology? Well, I don't think the Christians ever wanted to get out of samsara. It's just not part of the Christian goal. I mean, even St. John of the Cross, who may have been fully enlightened despite some of the limitations of his belief system, which he really didn't have much choice about. I mean, he lived in 16th century Spain. It was, you're a Roman Catholic or you're going to be getting visits from the Inquisition. Anyways, even St. John of the Cross says, I mean, from a Christian point of view, the highest possible state is the beatific vision, which is you go to heaven and you're in the presence of the throne of God, but still you don't merge with God. In a certain kind of way, a theological, abstract kind of way, everyone's already kind of merged with God, but still your individual soul stays individual even in heaven. So the Christians really aren't trying to transcend samsara. You know, their highest goal is going up into a high heaven realm and being in the presence of the throne of God. And apparently you fall onto your face over and over again saying, holy, 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 holy. Or at least I think that's what the book of Revelation says. So some people would say that the Christian God isn't a small g deva, small g God, small d deva, but he would be more like a Brahma, which would be higher than a deva. You know, that would be the highest heaven realms would be populated by Brahmas and not devas. But I mean, at no point, I don't think Christianity really progressed beyond the point of just accepting samsara as reality. And you're just going for a higher level of it. You're just trying to get into heaven, which lasts forever. And the Jews and the Muslims are pretty much the same in that belief. So let's see here. Let's just go through this question again. Considering how both Christians and Buddhists believe in heaven and hell, yeah, although the rules for heaven and hell are different. Could Christians technically be worshiping a small g god, a deva in the highest heaven realm? Well, it would be a Brahma in the highest heaven realm, but it would arguably be a small g god. I mean, if you study up on the evolution of Yahweh or Allah, let's just stick with Judeo-Christian Yahweh. I mean, he started off being a Canaanite god, El. And then at some point, some Moses figure, Moses is largely mythological, but some Moses-like figure who was maybe the son-in-law of a priest of Yahweh, a Midianite or Edomite god, somehow conflated El with Yahweh. And both of them were just pagan gods. I mean, back then, they weren't even denying that there were other gods. And then gradually, as the Jews became more civilized, more sophisticated in their theological beliefs, they got it down to there's only one God, and that's our God. But, I mean, it could be that it's just this, like a cultural construct of a Canaanite god El and a Midianite god Yahweh, influenced by some like ancient Egyptian ideas, some later Persian ideas. You know, it was just like a cultural construct. And then maybe everyone believing in it so fervently kind of created what some modern day pagans call an egregore, which is a being that exists in a kind of virtual form that takes on a kind of virtual reality due to the beliefs of the people fervently believing in it. Just investing all this psychic energy into the existence of this being can actually kind of cause a sort of quasi-being to exist. So there is that. I mean, you could argue, and I'm sure many people do, that they started off these crude pagan ideas of God and then just gradually transcended those until they got up to, you know, capital G, actual true God. But yeah, I think that the Vedantist Hindus come closer to an accurate description of like some capital G ultimate being than you're going to find in the Bible. I mean, Christians also have continued to become more sophisticated in their theology, so that what Catholics teach at their seminaries is getting so abstract that it is getting kind of similar to Buddhism. It's just their God is no longer a he. You know, he no longer likes this and hates that and that kind of thing. He no longer has any preferences or desires. It's just like this abstraction. So let's see, where's the actual question mark here? Let's see, could Christians technically be worshiping a small g God? Yeah, we already answered that part. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, let's take your pick. I mean, either it's just this belief in Yahweh or capital G God is a cultural construct. You know, I mean, obviously there is a history of this cultural construct going on with El and Yahweh being conflated into one God, and then El's consort somehow got divorced, and then there's, you know, some Egyptian elements and all this, and then just things just keep evolving. God just kept evolving. That's one reason why they had to invent Satan around the time of the Babylonian captivity, is that some of the statements about God in the Old Testament, I mean, he was responsible for all the bad stuff too, so they had to like come up with this cosmic villain to take the blame for a lot of the really bad stuff. Or you could say that they're just kind of feeling their way through the dark until they finally, you know, they're reaching towards this true capital G God. But still, I don't think that they've succeeded very well, other than a few mystics like St. John of the Cross, who have just sort of transcended their own cultural conditioning to have like this direct awareness of the transcendent, the absolute. But yeah, Christians aren't even trying. I don't think they were ever really trying, at least not consciously, to transcend samsara. The best you can do from the Christian point of view, like from the Catholic point of view, is to obtain the beatific vision. You go to heaven and you still are an individual soul that is not the same as God. And I'm just going to move on to Ethiopian fake Tig's next question, which is as follows. Having practiced for a while now, Buddhism would be absolute nihilism if karma wasn't involved, but we can't experience karma firsthand. Some people say bad things happen to good people and evil people win in life, but I disagree. I think bad things happen to everyone equally, including evil people who try to get ahead by doing evil deeds. I sometimes wonder why I don't bask in an endless pool of drugs and pleasure, and I realize that overstimulation will lead me not to have a good meditation and ruin everything else. In other words, it truly is not wholesome. I have stopped all addictions now, including porn, and I did it through the meditation practice, which always delivers a high I have never seen before. but I can't help but wonder, perhaps the meditation is all there is to it. Maybe if you do anything you want and still die, you just stay dead because karma isn't real. I guess the question here is, okay, we're getting to the actual question. I guess the question here is, can an unenlightened person know karma isn't real? Well, an unenlightened person really doesn't know anything. They just have beliefs. It is the nature of unenlightenment that it's not based on actual knowledge, but is based on belief. And obviously, unenlightened persons can believe that karma isn't real. But, I mean, superficial levels of karma are fairly obvious. And I'm not talking about, it's like something bad happens to you, so it must be the result of something bad that you did. But I'm talking about the superficial, obvious level of karma is like the autopilot, habit energy. We are creatures of habit, and that habit is indicative of psychic momentum, which is karma. It's like the momentum of our mind following these certain directions, just going through the same patterns over and over again. So most people are not fully awake. They're like just running on autopilot to a large degree. You're driving a car, you're not having to think about, every move you make of the steering wheel or the accelerator pedal, anything like that. It's just a habit that you do without even really being fully aware of it. And that applies to eating, walking, using the toilet, taking a shower. Just almost everything we do is just like done in a state that is not fully awake. Like if you're fully awake, you're walking along, you're fully aware, you'd be aware of like the sensations of the cloth touching and rubbing against your skin, like the breeze on the skin of your face, just like subtle background noises, this kind of thing. And it all just gets filtered out because you're not fully awake. You're just following this autopilot. And that autopilot is karma. Or another way of interpreting it, just going with Buddhist philosophy, karma is will. Karma is volition. So if karma isn't real, volition isn't real because they are identical. That's how karma is defined. A lot of people, including a lot of Buddhists, don't really understand what karma is all about. They think that it's some kind of as yet undiscovered law of physics out there that just causes everything to stay in balance by causing like an equal and opposite reaction to every action. But that's really not the way. I mean, it can turn out that way as a kind of side effect, but really it's just this habitual way of dealing with life that causes us, and you get into like the deeper metaphysical levels, then it's just like this semi-conscious knee-jerk way of just creating the world we live in. And so we just get stuck in these patterns. But an unenlightened person really doesn't know anything. They can believe all kinds of stuff. So let's see here. I guess I'll just move on to the next question. Okay, this is also from Ethiopian Fake Tig. He says, how do Burmese monks who revere the Buddha like a god make up for the fact that the Buddha, who they claim to know all things and see all things beyond even the gods, couldn't see that his last meal would have been the thing that kills him? And there's a couple things I can say about this. First of all, in Orthodox Theravada, the way they interpret the Buddha's omniscience, they do consider the Buddha to be omniscient, but he is selectively omniscient. He doesn't know all things all the time, like a Jain Tirthankara. According to the Jains, like a fully enlightened Tirthankara, like their equivalent to a Buddha, he knows everything all at once at all times. It's just he's always like omniscient, always. But in Theravada Buddhism, he has to direct his attention to something in order to know what it is he wants to know. And even then, he may not be able to know for sure what's going to happen 1,000 years from now because he can't see into the future. I mean, he would have to use a kind of extrapolation, which would only work in a state of pure determinism, which the Buddha himself denied. But, so there is that the Buddha is selectively, virtually omniscient, but he has to actually direct his mind to something in order to know it. And if it's knowable, then he will know it. But with regard to the Buddha's last meal, which is kind of a different question, he apparently, according to the legend, all we've got to work with is the legend. We don't have forensic evidence. We don't have the coroner's report or anything like that. All we have is the legend. So, according to the legend, the Buddha evidently did know in advance that he was going to die. He was hinting about this to Ananda, that he was going to die soon. Ananda didn't want to hear it. Then, after he goes and eats his final meal, he tells the person who offers the meal, don't feed this to anybody else. Don't give it to anyone else. Don't even eat it yourself. You should take this food and go and throw it in the river. And when it got into a pond or something, you throw it into water where there's no sentient beings. So it could be like a stagnant pond or something. And after, according to the legend, when it got thrown into the water, it just started bubbling and hissing like he had thrown some kind of red hot iron into the water. So the Buddha knew that he was going to be poisoned, but at the same time, according to legend, he knew that it was just his time to go. He gave some hints, and nobody really wanted to pick up on the hint. They didn't want to hear that. And so he died. There's similar stories about Neem Karoli Baba up there on top of the bookcase, who, based on modern testimonies, like contemporaneous testimonies from people who were there, that Maharaji also was hinting that he was going to die soon. It's like of some Zen masters also. There's a few stories of Zen masters, like Chinese Chan masters, who would actually send out invitations to his final sermon, and then he'd deliver one last sermon and then just keel over dead. Although in a case like that, you may be terminally ill and know that you're not long for this world. So there's that also. There's some people who think that the Buddha really didn't die of dysentery or poisoning from the food, that he had a kind of intestinal condition that some very old people get, where it's like gangrene of the intestinal system, can be very painful. And if it was some kind of terminal chronic condition that was getting worse and worse, then it wouldn't take any kind of enlightened being to be able to predict that they were not going to live very much longer. But according to the legends, which is all we have really, he did know in advance that he was going to die, which is one reason why, assuming that it was the quality of the food, that's why he told Chunda, don't feed this to anybody else, just throw it away. So, I think I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Gordon. And Gordon says, regarding the priest monk, was he Catholic pretending to be a Buddhist, or a Buddhist pretending to be a Catholic, or did he think he was both? And this is with regard to a certain Catholic priest that I met in Burma. And when I met him, he was wearing monk's robes. He had been ordained. It turned out later, he came to visit me again, just dressed as a layperson. He was ordained as a novice. So he wasn't fully ordained. He was sort of in what a Catholic would call lesser orders or minor orders. He was ordained as a samanera or a novice, but he was an ordained Catholic priest. He hadn't stopped being an ordained Catholic priest. I think only the Pope can actually allow like a priest or a monk to disrobe in Roman Catholicism, which didn't happen. So, yeah, and he came to visit me, and I found out that he was a Catholic priest. And when he wrote to me saying he would like to come back to Burma and visit me again, I said, okay, please don't be ordained as a monk this time, or even as a novice. You know, it's like, would Catholics ordain a Buddhist that wasn't even a Catholic as like a Catholic monk or a priest? You know, it just wasn't entirely appropriate, at least in my opinion. So he explained to me, I mean, on the one hand, I mean, he's a really good guy, very intelligent. He was a Catholic priest in Austria. So he wasn't American, he was Austrian. And he was kind of losing his faith, or that's what I was told by somebody else. You know, he was losing his fervor, I guess, losing his faith to some degree. And I don't want to be slandering him or anything like this. I really have nothing but like goodwill towards this person. And he was just interested in like Buddhist practices like meditation. And I mean, I told him that, you know, almost every practice in Theravada Buddhism is also found in Catholicism. You know, like the contemplative orders, like the Discalced Carmelites. You know, they've got mindfulness practice, they've got jhana, they've got, you know, essentially all the spiritual practices that Buddhists have. They've got, and it's within like a Catholic context. So why didn't you come all the way to Burma to practice meditation when the Catholics back there in Europe still teach that's essentially the same thing? And his answer was that it's esoteric in Catholicism, that you have to actually join the order in order to practice that stuff. And otherwise, they won't teach it to you. So he was mainly just trying to, you know, see what it was like to be a monk and, you know, practice some of the meditation techniques and that kind of thing. So, I mean, you could say that he was a Catholic pretending to be a Buddhist, but he was, like a lot of Westerners, he was just too broad-minded to fit into a narrow category. So he was kind of eclectic. You know, I'm the same way. It's not like I just firmly adhere to Orthodox Theravada Buddhism. That sometimes I think the Mahayana Buddhists are more correct, or sometimes I'll acknowledge, like I just did, that the Catholics or Christians in general teach essentially the same stuff. So, I mean, it's kind of like locking yourself into a box. If you're just going to be, I mean, for some people, it works better that way, where you just firmly adhere to like one system. You've got stainless steel faith in that one system. And that will help to, I mean, it very much helps you if you have no doubt at all that this is the way, then it really can inspire you to do your best. If you've got doubts, lukewarmness, not so much. But some of us, I mean, we can't just decide we're going to believe 100% of what is in our religion or what is in our political party or whatever. You know, it's just you have no choice but to just kind of like overflow into other points of view. And that was the way he was. So, yeah, I mean, it was kind of, I consider it to be somewhat inappropriate for him to be ordaining, even as a novice, when he was still an ordained Catholic priest. So, but I mean, he accepted that with good grace. I think he accepted my request that, or maybe he just had no intention to be ordained again as a novice. So he just came in layman's clothing the next time he came. He and his friend, who was a Hungarian philosophy student. So, yeah, I guess I answered that about as well as I'm able to. I could go for another half hour, but I don't think I'd get much better at answering the question. So I'm just going to move on to Gordon's second question, which is his last question, which is the last question of this Q&A. And Gordon says, in previous episodes, you've talked about your deal breakers with Christianity and Islam, and I guess by extension Judaism, and the reasons why you could never be a secular materialist. Do you have any similar hard nose for Hinduism? So why I could not be a Hindu. I don't think there's any hard nose for Hinduism, but there's a few soft nose. Just, let's see. One is their belief in is kind of like a quibble, really. But they insist that there is the Atman, which is a reification of the absolute. And I do think the Buddhists are more, what do you call it, more wise or more prudent to just refuse to reify the absolute. So there is that. I mean, Hinduism also has a lot of just weird beliefs, Ganesh, the Indian or the elephant-headed god, and just all these weird stories that, you kind of really don't have to believe them. But, it's pretty deeply ingrained. It's not as necessary to believe in stories of Shiva or Ganesh or Kali. It's not as important in Hinduism as it is in Christianity to believe in Jesus, that he's the only begotten Son of God and the Messiah who died for our sins and all that. But I guess the two main soft no's with regard to Hinduism is, first, they reified the absolute, which, that's kind of a quibble. It's like whatever you say is going to be kind of invalid with regard to the absolute anyway. But also, technically in Hinduism, it seems that you are required to accept that the four Vedas are eternal, that they weren't really composed by human beings. The human beings, the seven sages, just kind of channeled it out of the ether, out of like the infinite cosmos, where it has been residing forever and ever and always will reside. That the four Vedas are just, the ultimate authority, the ultimate scriptural authority. And you read the Vedas, and it's pretty primitive. It's getting back towards like Old Testament level religion, where it's like paganism, where you are honoring these gods and making fire sacrifices. Back Rig Veda days, it was still bloody animal sacrifices for the sake of cattle and sons and victory over one's enemies, this kind of stuff. So there's that too. But probably there's a lot of people who consider themselves to be Hindus who just kind of conveniently ignore the four Vedas, much like a lot of Western Buddhists conveniently ignore the entire Abhidhamma Pitaka, the entire third Pitaka of the Buddhist Tipitaka. So, neither one of those is really disqualifier. So Hinduism is like a soft no. If I were not a Buddhist, I'd probably be gravitating towards something like Vedantist Hinduism. So that would be like my second choice after Buddhism would be something like Vedantist Hinduism, I'm pretty sure. And that's it. That's the last question. And so I guess we done. Less than 2 hours too. So, like I always say, you think I can answer a question about Buddhism, ancient India, Dharma in general, philosophy, etc., etc., etc. If you think there's a good chance I can answer the question, feel free to ask. I promise I'll do my best to answer it. I don't promise that I'll answer it to your satisfaction, but I'll give it a shot. I'll do my best. That's why I'm here, as a public service, as like an alternative to grok. And like and subscribe if you have not done so already. And look at the URL links, which eventually I am hoping that that fourth book will finally be published, and the link to Amazon link will be down there in the URL links along with everything else. And golly, I guess I'm getting a new job soon, which I can tell you about next time maybe if anyone's interested. And until then, be happy and stuff.